This week we have parashot Shemini, meaning 8, which comes from Leviticus 9:1 through 11:47. Shemini is the 26th reading from the Torah and the third reading from the book of Leviticus. The word Shemini means 8, and it comes from the first words in Exodus 91, which says, "Now it came about the 8th day, when Moshe called Aaron and his sons and the elders of the Israelites." The text goes on to describe the events of the 8th day, after the setting up of the tabernacle, followed by a tragic incident. Throughout the first part of this Torah portion, we have focused on Aaron and his sons were trained to be Kohanim, or priests, and were to give specific offerings to Elohim. And it reads, "On the 8th day, Moshe came to Aaron, his sons and the leaders of Israel, and said to Aaron, 'Take the male calf for a sin offering, and the ram for a burnt offering, both without defect, and offer them to Elohim. And tell the people of Israel, take a male goat for a sin offering, and a calf and a lamb, both a year old, and without defect, for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for a peace offering, to sacrifice before Elohim. Also a grain offering, mixed with olive oil, because today Elohim is going to appear to you.'" Elohim was doing all of this because he wanted them to understand obedience. Would they be obedient to him? If the commandment came from Elohim to Moshe, and Moshe was being a vessel or a mouthpiece for Elohim, why wouldn't they obey? Why wouldn't they follow? If Elohim told you directly to do something, would you do it or would you hesitate? Has he told you to do something? The question is, are you obedient or are you submitting to your will? Often we know the voice of Elohim, we hear the voice, but at times we get confused. We're confused by what we hear because we hear other voices. Not other voices so much in our head, voices from those who are not speaking according to his will, so there is no light in them. Are you taking advice from those who speak according to the voice of Elohim? Or are you listening and following other voices? Just as some say the scriptures of Torah were done away with and don't matter. Where did you hear that? Where does Torah say that? Where does it say that in the New Covenant? Is this opinion or is this written in Torah? Leviticus 10:1 reads, "But Nadav and Avinu, the sons of Aaron, each took his censer, put fire on it, laid incense on it, and offered unauthorized fire before Elohim, something he did not order them to do. At this, fire came forth from the presence of Elohim and consumed them. So they died in the presence of Elohim." The mechanical reads, "The sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avinu, each took his fire pan, and they placed fire on it. They placed incense smoke upon her, and they brought strange fire near to the face of Yahweh, which he did not direct them." The word for fire is aish. Aish in the Hebrew is fire. This interpretation seems unlikely as the original meaning, so we really don't know what they brought or how they acted in front of the tent of meeting. The Hebrew reads specifically, "V'yakri lifene aish za'ar." Fire be strange. So we don't know what the fire was, but we know they were acting strange. We know if we're coming into the presence of the Most High. Are we to act strange, or are we to present ourselves accordingly? After all the training, after all the regulations, after words came directly from Elohim through Moshe as to how they were supposed to conduct themselves, after all the preparation, After all the words, they chose to go against their. This is just like us. We know what to do. We know how to do it. But we listen to others. We do what we want to, as opposed to represent the Most High. Do we represent Him, or do we represent other gods? Do we speak according to His word, or bring strange fire into His presence? Do you choose to offer Za'ar Aish? You have to make a choice. And with it came a consequence. At this, fire came forth from the presence of Elohim and consumed them. So they died in the presence of Elohim. They died. Did Elohim have a choice, or did He command them differently? Did He not train them, or did He give them specific training? They had a choice, just as we have a choice every day. Is what we present to Elohim strange fire, or is what we present a choice to act accordingly, to act as we know we should present ourselves in His presence? Verse 3 says, Moshe said to Aaron, "This is what Elohim said, through those who are near me, I will be consecrated, and before all the people, I will be glorified." Aaron kept silent. Moshe called Mishkael and Eleazar and Elzaphan, sons of Uzziel, Aharon's uncle, and told them, "Come here, and carry your cousins away from in front of the sanctuary to a place outside the camp." They approached and carried them in their tunics out of the camp, as Moshe had said. Then Moshe told Aaron and his sons, Eleazar and Itamar, "Don't unbind your hair or tear your clothes in mourning, so that you won't die and so that Elohim won't be angry with the entire community. Rather, let your kinsmen, the whole house of Israel, mourn because of the destruction Elohim brought about with His fire. Moreover, don't leave the entrance of the tent of meeting, or you will die, because Elohim's anointing is on you." Moshe told Aaron, "Don't mourn. Don't be upset. Don't be upset because they knew better." Elohim gave direct commands regarding how they were to act and how they were to present themselves. They chose not to, because those who don't present themselves in the right way or accordingly must suffer. Has anyone ever suffered because of a bad decision you made? Were you acting according to your will or the will of Elohim? Were your thoughts clear, or were you unsure? In verse 8, Elohim speaks to Aaron directly. Adonai said to Aaron, "Don't drink wine or intoxicating liquor, neither you nor your sons with you, when you enter the tent of meeting, so that you will not die. This will be a permanent regulation throughout your generations, so that you will distinguish between the holy and the common, and between the unclean and the clean." Everything has to be separate. Everything has to be set apart. That which is for Elohim is His. It cannot be presented in a drunken state. It cannot be presented with an unclear mind. It has to be presented in a state that is holy. And let's go to the Hebrew on this. You will not gulp wine or liquor, you and your sons with you, when coming to the appointed tent, and you will not die. It is a distant custom for you for generations, and to make separation between the special and the ordinary, and between the dirty and the clean. We cannot approach Elohim any way we want to. We cannot approach Elohim with the wrong state of mind. I was attending a private function a few weeks ago, and someone asked me if I wanted wine to drink. And my response was, no, I choose not to have any because I'm presenting tomorrow. Their response was, what's it matter? It doesn't matter how you present yourself. If you already have your sermon ready, If you've already prepared to present, what's it matter? And that's when I thought, I disagree. For if I'm presenting in the presence of Elohim, first and foremost, my mind must be clear. I am presenting through him and to his people. I have to make sure that I present with clarity and with specificity so the people can comprehend and hear what word Elohim has for them. And in verse 1 of the final chapter, it reads, Adonai said to Moshe and Aharon, both at the same time, tell the people of Israel, these are the living creatures which you may eat among all the land animals. Any that have a separate hoof, which is completely divided, and chews the cud, these animals you may eat. But you are not to eat those that only chew the cud, or only have separate hoof. For example, the camel, the coney, and the hare are unclean to you, because they chew the cud, but do not have separate hoof. While the pig is unclean to you, although it has a separate and completely divided hoof, it does not chew the cud. You are not to eat meat from these or touch their carcasses. They are unclean for you. Of all the things that live in the water, you may eat these. Anything in the water that has fins and scales, whether in the sea or in rivers, these you may eat. But everything in the sea and rivers without both fins and scales, of all the small water creatures and of all the living creatures in the water, is a detestable thing for you. Yes, these will be detestable for you. You are not to eat their meat. You are to detest their carcasses. Whatever lacks fins and scales in the water is a detestable thing for you. The following creatures of the air are to be detestable for you. They are not to be eaten. They are a detestable thing. The eagle, the vulture, the osprey, the kite, the various kinds of buzzards, the various kinds of ravens, the ostrich, the screech owl, the seagull, the various kinds of hawks, the little owl, the cormotor, the great owl, the horned owl, the pelican, the barn owl, the stork, the various kinds of heron, the hoopie, and the bat. Currently, we're dealing with a situation with a virus. The virus originally was formed somehow through a bat's DNA. It may have also included the DNA of a snake and a Patagonia. This may have been a medicine. But in Leviticus, it clearly says, this is not to be consumed. Verse 20 reads, all winged swarming creatures that go on all fours are detestable things for you, except that of all winged swarming creatures that goes on all fours, you may eat those that have joined legs above their feet, enabling them to jump off the ground. Specifically, of these you may eat the various kinds of locusts, grasshopper, katyidads, and crickets. But other than that, all winged swarming creatures having 4 feet are detestable things to you. The following will make you unclean. Whoever touches the carcass of them will be unclean until evening. And whoever picks up a part of their carcass is to wash their clothes and be unclean until evening. Every animal that has a separate but incomplete divided hoof, or that doesn't chew the cud, is unclean to you. Anyone who touches them will be unclean. Whatever goes on its paws among all animals that go on all fours is unclean for you. Whoever touches its carcass will be unclean until evening. And whoever picks up its carcass is to wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. These are unclean to you. The following are unclean for you among the small creatures that swarm on the ground, the weasel, the mouse, the various kinds of lizards, the gecko, the land crocodile, the skink, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. They are unclean, crawling creatures. Whoever touches them when they are dead will be unclean until evening. Anything on which one of them falls when dead will become unclean. Wooden utensils, articles of clothing, leather, sacking, any utensils used for work. It must be put in water. It is to be unclean until evening. Then it will be clean. If one of them falls into a clay pot, whatever is in it will be unclean, and you are to break the pot. Any food permitted to be eaten, that the water from such a vessel gets on will become unclean. And any permitted liquid in such a vessel will become unclean. Everything on which any carcass part, anything on which any carcass part of theirs falls on, will become unclean, whether oven or stove. It is to be broken into pieces. They are unclean, and will be unclean to you. Although a spring or cistern for collecting water remains clean, but anyone who touches one of their carcasses will become unclean. If any carcass part of theirs, or any kind of seed to be sown, it is unclean. But if water is put on the seed, and the carcass part of theirs falls on it, it is unclean for you. If any animal of a kind that you are permitted to eat dies, whoever touches its carcass will be unclean until evening. A person who eats meat of its carcass or carries its carcass is to wash his clothes. He will be unclean until evening. Any creature that swarms on the ground is a detestable thing. It is not to be eaten. Whatever moves on its stomach, goes on all fours, or has legs, all creatures that swarm on the ground, you are not to eat them, because they are detestable things. You are not to make yourself detestable with any of these swarming, crawling creatures. Do not make yourself unclean with them. Do not defile yourself with them. For I am Elohai, your Elohim. Therefore consecrate yourself, and be holy, for I am holy. And do not defile yourselves with any kind of swarming creature that moves among you on the ground. For I am Elohim, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, to be your Elohim. Therefore you are to be holy, because I am holy. Such then is the law concerning animals, flying creatures, all living creatures that move above the water, and all creatures that swarm on the ground. Its purpose is to distinguish the unclean and the clean, between the creature that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. There are certain animals that are acceptable to eat because they're clean. There are certain that have been considered unclean from the onset. Some say this doesn't matter because Paul did away with this, and Paul said, do not call anything that I have created unclean. But was Paul referring to animals, or was Paul referring to people? Paul never discussed clean or unclean food. He discussed Jews and non-practicing Jews. Read it for yourself. Before you get so critical, read the entire passage and ask Elohim for guidance.